nearly a month after the mass killing at the Mexico City entrance. This Thursday, 2 detainees related to the murder of those 24 people whose bodies were found were presented. On September 12th in La Marquesa,
On September 12, 2008,
At 5 in the morning, the State Police of Mexico almost blindly crossed a clearing of tall vegetation.
the sun had not yet risen and their flashlights provided narrow, punctual guidance. Time was of the essence. The officers were looking for the lifeless bodies of 24 missing people, which an anonymous informant reported having seen there.
It was 6:30 in the morning without finding anything, and they were about to give up.
But with the dawn over the landscape of San Isidro de Hualtepec in the vicinity of La Marquesa National Park, the sun's rays finally illuminated a pile of corpses. There they were, squeezed into a bowl of earth, 24 bodies.
Well, more than anything, because they had already seen faces, they were also deceived. It was innocent people, it was purely deceived people.
Being a country overwhelmed by losses, by human losses and insecurity, mainly a product of organized crime, the officers, accustomed to these findings, still felt disconcerted upon seeing 24 men showing signs of suffering and bound hand and foot. And by men, I mean bodies. All were barefoot, some without clothes, and had been finished off with a coup de grace to the head. But others had been dismembered in the worst ways you can imagine. They had removed the top part. Who were they? Who killed these people and why? Were they the questions? Well, before we continue, let's start with the investigation. The appearance of 24 bodies with a coup de grace in a forest near the Mexican capital shocked the country. Can you imagine transforming this event into the most serious or one of the most serious as a result of the war between the cartels? And that year left more than 3,167 people dead, 18% more than the murders of the entire year. 2007, just to give you an idea. Enrique Peña Nieto, the state governor at the time, framed the case in the context of the widespread violence occurring in several states across the country, because organized crime did not respect borders. According to this politician, it was a matter linked to drug trafficking and to the internal conflict between criminal gangs themselves due to their dispute over the control of various regions of the country.
I believe that Mexico will continue its fight against drug trafficking, production and trafficking of narcotics, including marijuana.
Following the tragic incident, President Felipe Calderón conveyed the authorities' worry regarding the case, and he insisted that fighting organized crime was one of the priority issues of his mandate.
They point out
that Raul Villa Ortega was the material author of each and every one of the 24 deaths.
A month after this terrible event and pressured by the general annoyance of Mexicans at this outrageous act, the commander of the Whiskey Lucan police, Antonio Ramirez Cervantes, and the alleged member of the Beltran Leyva cartel, Raul Villa Ortega, were presented as the alleged culprits.
the detainees are Raul Villa Ortega, alleged member of the Sinaloa cartel, who admitted to working for Edgar Valdez Villarreal, alias La Barbie, and owning a security company located in Ecatepec.
According to authorities, the police officer confessed to having participated in the abduction and transfer of the victims. Meanwhile, Villa Ortega claimed to be a member of the criminal group and to work for Edgar Valdez Villarreal, better known as La Barbie, one of the most violent drug traffickers.
Antonio Ramirez Cervantes participated, along with others, in the abduction of the victims and subsequently in their transfer to the place where they were deprived of life.
But they were only the first on the long list of those implicated, obviously through a recording. Adrian Ramirez Soria, alias El Hongo, one of the members of the Beltran Leyva cartel, gave his testimony and assured that he himself interrogated the people who were later killed. According to his account, that terrifying day, around 2 a.m, he was contacted by R, who informed him that he had captured 24 members of the Michoacana family. Ramirez Soria arrived at the location and interrogated them as ordered. According to him, he was sure that the 24 worked for the family and were not Masons, as they swore to be. The national media rapidly learned of their dead bodies being found. Due to the brutality of the images, the international press joined the coverage, giving it screen time and recognition outside of Mexico. In response, Attorney General Eduardo Medina Mora felt international pressure, forcing him to make a statement. According to him, the deaths would be related to organized crime as a result of a settling of scores. Initially, the Deputy Attorney's Office for Special Investigations into Organized Crime claimed that the victims belonged to the gangs Los Pelones and La Familia. What was his situation when he said this? Well, his purpose was, as usual, to sweep this crime under the rug, that is, to leave it archived. And for you to understand, it was to stop talking about the issue that was starting to tarnish the name of the politicians in charge.
Oscar Osvaldo Garcia Montoya.
How old are you?
36 years.
Where are you from?
Originally from Guasave, Sinaloa, raised by monsters.
What do they call you?
The hand with eyes.
However, his words were quickly taken with a grain of salt after Oscar Osvaldo Garcia Montoya, alias the Hand with Eyes, who was there at the time of this sad event, denied his version and that of Ramirez Soria, clarifying that the people killed in La Marquesa were innocent, but they had to take their lives because they had seen the faces of the hitmen who had interrogated them. Although the 24 begged for their lives and promised not to say anything, these people had no compassion and got rid of the witnesses to their evil.
Did he let you participate in the La Marquesa issue? Because that issue was handled by the office. Do you participate in the Levanton? Yes, in El Olivo? Yes, and in their execution. He did not participate in their execution.
With this confession, the theory began to circulate that the 24 were involved in masonry and came from Veracruz, Hidalgo, Oaxaca, and the state of Mexico.
How many executions have you ordered? I think more than 300 deaths.
Those who could not be silenced were the relatives of the 24, who also denied the version that the lifeless men were members of organized crime. According to their relatives, none of these had any connections with any cartel. And as proof, they offered the media a glimpse of their precarious homes in the poorest regions of Veracruz, Oaxaca, Puebla, and Hidalgo, showing that they were simple workers who walked on the honest side of life. And it is here that I make a parenthesis. We all know that cartel members are known not only for their cruelty, but also for their lifestyle. Or, well, their life full of luxuries that is far or very different from the life of a worker.
Do you think if we were drug traffickers, we would live so poorly?
That's what Abelina Cinta questioned in front of local media while waiting for her nephew Abraham's coffin in San Andres, Tuxtla. The young man who was killed was buried beside his cousins Santos, Pedro, and Angel. Just like in the families of the 24, neighbors and friends demanded that the federal government rectify that they were all good men, not criminals. After the pain of their deaths, they didn't want their memory to be tarnished in that way. Enough damage had already been done to them, they at least deserved to rest with dignity.
And how many have you done? Another 300?
Following the line then of the detainees. A month later, after the events in the country's capital, a member of organized crime was arrested. Little known, who denied the authorities' statements and instead confirmed the family's claims.
And, by the way, revealed the most abhorrent part of this situation.
This individual was Gerardo Álvarez Vázquez, known as El Chayán, who detailed the rottenness of the world he was part of.
There began to be a lot of methamphetamine trafficking in the southern United States that served the Sinaloa cartel for the Beltran Leyva.
El Chayán, he was a criminal. Particular in some way, he was not like the other drug traffickers. He was not motivated by money, but by the fame that comes with having bundles of bills. This character loved to visit the most exclusive bars and be surrounded by women who appeared as extras in soap operas or hostesses in commercials to whom he himself promised fame for their supposed connection with show business.
He wanted to be famous. He didn't want to be a boss of any cartel. He wanted to be recognized, to get along with actresses, with beautiful women.
This character did not want to have a low profile, hiding in the shadows and in large mansions like his colleagues, but to be known and sought after by the authorities. No matter the reason, he only dreamed of his face being plastered everywhere.
He was tasked with coordinating drug trafficking at the airports in Cancun and Mexico City. And he quickly gets involved in the world of table dance.
Chayán excited him. To give you an idea, the thought that in the United States, the authorities were offering $2 million for his capture and the fact that they had been frustrated for months because they couldn't find him. But what was his role on that terrifying night? How do we connect him to this? Well, here you go.
But what brings him to fame is the Marquesa's most secret. In 2008, when 24 people are found dead.
In 2008, when his bosses, the Beltran Leyva, split from the Sinaloa cartel. El Chayán saw a similar opportunity to his rise to control of the country's main airports. He requested to oversee the plazas in Mexico City, State of Mexico, and his home state of Guerrero. Luckily for him, he was granted these areas under the orders of Edgar Valdez Villarreal, Lavarvi, and Oscar Garcia Montoya, El Compayito.
Back in 2008, when the Beltran Leyva cartel was at its peak, but arrests of some of the Beltran Leyva brothers were starting to happen.
That's how El Chayán committed the atrocity of the 24 Masons of La Marquesa. And to please his superiors and climb to the top of the drug trade. He carried out the murder of dozens more whose connections to organized crime he did not investigate before their deaths. It was part of his violent style to first order the crimes, take the lives, and then investigate. In the search file that the Mexican government compiled on Chayán, it was described that his mere presence on the streets skyrocketed the number of homicides. Thanks to these masks, this guy got the attention of the Federal Public Security Secretary. So it was that in an operation carried out at 4 in the afternoon on the 21st of April of the year, 2010, about 8 kilometers from where the 24 Masons were found, the army and the federal police surrounded Chayán's house. Although the criminal boss had an arsenal at his home and was surrounded by the protection of 18 accomplices who watched his back at all times, they were all surprised and easily disarmed. And here's where I ask myself, what good did fame do him if he is now locked up and no one remembers him?
He is a key operator of the Beltran cartel. Leyva, arrested in April 2010, is accused of over 20 murders.
The following day, the Mexican government paraded the detainee as a battle trophy, true to their style. So, Chayán did not allow himself to be seen in unkempt clothes or the typical Sinaloan drug trafficker style. On the contrary, he was committed to his businessman profile.
And Galan wore a perfectly ironed white shirt, a black jacket, and a neatly trimmed goatee.
The first thing that was disconcerting about this case was that his arrest was not the first but the fourth. The second thing, and what the Attorney General's office failed to mention, was that his mansion and his operations center for years was alone. Hold on with this mockery. Just 300 meters from the Avila Camacho residence, a federal government property used by the Presidency of the Republic. What a nerve. Since his capture, Gerardo Álvarez Vázquez, alias El Chayán, has sought to maintain his notoriety. Protection after protection, appeal after appeal. He tried to get out of the pavilion of the most violent inmates that make up the Federal Social Readaptation Center 1 in the Altiplano state of Mexico. His efforts finally collapsed in November of the year 2024 when a federal judge handed him a 20-year sentence for organized crime, which, well, is a gift that, although his release was agreed for the year 2030, that is, at his 65 years of age, his hopes of being released were shattered by his pending issues with the American Justice, which now identifies him as a member of an organization that causes terror according to the new law of President Donald Trump. Once again, I ponder, what did fame do for him? What did fame achieve? Nothing. Currently, his name is on the list of organized crime bosses who would be transferred to the United States.
Apparently, his dream of being famous, of seeing his name in the newspapers and his photos on American television would come true.
But not for, let's say, what he was expecting. El Chayán, or El Indio as many also called him, could walk not on the walk of fame but rather on the death row. El Chayán, likewise, was not the first nor the last one arrested for this sad event of the 24 Masons. Victor Hugo Martinez Rocha El Rocha, head of gunmen for the Sinaloa cartel, fell in a federal operation in October of the year. In 2008, he immediately sought to become a protected witness to reduce his prison sentence. In exchange, he collaborated with the authorities to resolve the doubt about this sad event of La Marquesa, according to his testimony. He assured that the 24 were contacted by the cartel in different territories of the country so that, without knowing each other, they could build drug tunnels. This is, as you surely already know, a method used by organized crime to traffic narcotics and go unnoticed by the authorities.
Were they all bricklayers who were deceived into building a drug tunnel? And as things got complicated, there came an episode in which that tragedy occurred.
Apparently, none of them knew who their employer was, nor the details of the work. They would only find out when they reached the border with the United States, which, as we know, never happened. According to Martinez Rocha, the 24 of them left their communities excitedly for a project that was supposedly going to give them a generous payment. To avoid exhausting them then with a direct journey, they all made a stop at a Lucan whiskey house in the state of Mexico. And well, that's where everything went overboard. And just a few months before this event, the Beltran Leyva brothers had separated from their partners. El Chapo and El Mayo settled on the outskirts of Mexico City in search of new territories. Thus, a hawk from the Beltran Leyva, who protected the plaza of the state of Mexico. He observed from his hiding place these 24 foreign men entering a house, and he mistakenly thought the worst, that these poor workers were enemies, infiltrating the new zones of their bosses. So, believing he was doing his job well, if we can call this a job, he notified the local boss, Oscar Garcia Montoya, alias the little buddy of the false usurpation.
And with what did you decapitate him? With hands, with knives, with saws.
El Compayito was a kind of the worst and unscrupulous who did not hesitate to personally go to the house in Whiskey Lucan where the 24 were. Thus, in the darkness of the night, he broke into the house and surprised the workers who were taking a break. Really, without understanding what was happening. Everyone was interrogated violently, using the pressure methods he learned from Guatemalan civilians and Mexican Marines.
I am a tribal, a person to kill, the more to kill. No.
However, the painful ways of making him suffer were not bearing fruit, because in reality none of them were infiltrators from the rival group. Thus, after hours of psychological and physical terror, he became convinced that none of them were criminals but simply deceived Masons who posed no risk to his organization. And that could have been enough to no longer bother this group of people. It could have ended up as a traumatic night that would remain, let's call it an anecdote, and nothing more than a terrifying memory. But as I had told you before, El Compayito was a violent guy who showed no mercy when making a horrible decision. Even though these poor men were not enemies, they all had to lose their lives that night because they had seen his face. After his 2011 arrest, Oscar Garcia Montoya confessed to participating in that massacre, claiming that they were innocent people who had nothing to do with it, as they were mistaken for members of the Michoacana family. But since they had already seen faces, they proceeded to take life in the most ruthless way.
More than anything, they were deceived because they had already seen faces. They were innocent, pure people who were misled.
Garcia Montoya said that they took their lives after his criminal organization received erroneous information detailing that the residence where the construction workers lived was supposedly a meeting point for the Michoacana family. Those who intended to start a fight to control the area.
Who did this? Who didn't do this?
But the hitman did not take their lives quickly and mercifully. No, the little companion, a being of the worst kind, decided that the 24 would lose their lives slowly, punished for a fault, I repeat, they did not commit, simply because he felt like it and had the power to do so. However, the criminal did not want to dirty his hands with innocent blood, so he chose his favorite executioner, Gerardo Álvarez Vázquez, alias El Chayán, who carried out the task with extreme cruelty and with one goal in mind, that his name and his photograph would reach the main media outlets and thus achieve his much-desired fame. But as we said, he was obsessed with being famous, willing to do whatever it took to achieve it, even if it meant ending the lives of 24 people, if that's what it took for his name to be known. But was this the whole truth, you might be wondering?
According to the event reconstruction, on September 12, 2008, the boss ordered their kidnapping.
24 people from the south of the country, from states like Chiapas and Oaxaca, who were hired to do masonry work. None doubted the job offer because they were looking to earn more than 80 pesos a day, which they averaged in the marginalized areas. The construction workers arrived in the municipality of Huizquilucan, where they rented a property unexpectedly. That this place would be the cause of their death, as it was pointed out as a meeting point for members of the Michoacana family. And being mistaken by this criminal organization, the former operators of the Beltran-Leyva cartel ended the lives of the 24 men. They didn't know what was happening because they only came to work on a project.
They had seen the faces of many people, so they couldn't let them go.
Being a noticeable number of workers and people who roamed that place with physical characteristics and features different from those of the local inhabitants, they raised the suspicions of the criminals. That night, an armed convoy of almost 40 people arrived who subdued the bricklayers.
No one resisted, no one defended themselves because they had nothing to do so with. None of their victims knew what was happening.
The workers were deprived of their freedom at the aforementioned address. They took their lives and abandoned their bodies in the vicinity of La Marquesa, where signs of their suffering could be seen. Bullet impacts, gunshot wounds, and some were half naked. The pile of lifeless bodies were found by peasants on Friday afternoon in a forest, an area through which the busy Mexico-Toluca highway passes, which is about 30 kilometers from the capital. The deceased were men between 25 and 35 years old, all dressed in light clothing as for warm areas and with very short haircuts.
They had already seen the faces of many people, so they couldn't let him go.
His end was considered the worst multiple execution in at least 10 years in Mexico, only surpassed by the murder of 45 indigenous people at the hands of paramilitaries in Actil in the state of Chiapas in December of 97 in the context of the Zapatista uprising. At first, it was believed that all the victims were adult men. The investigation later revealed a harsh and bewildering truth. The youngest victim was Abraham Sintatamis, a child, a teenager of just 14 years old, who was tormented for hours until his life was cruelly taken away, who had traveled with the dream of a better life, of a more stable economic situation than in his hometown, ultimately killed in the worst way by cruel and inhuman beings. I repeat to you, a child.
3.8 million Mexicans fell into poverty due to the pandemic, inflation, and other factors.
From a young age, Abraham liked to work because when he was studying primary school, in his free time, he worked at a fruit and vegetable stand in the city market of San Andres in Tuxtla. They cared little, likewise, that the minor had abandoned his studies and had only been working for a month to help his family.
The places where recruitment occurs most have to do, where there is poverty, where public services are lacking.
Just like today, due to the negligence of the Veracruz authorities who do not build a bridge, Abraham crossed the Choteapan River daily to go to school and work. But after finishing primary school, despite his father's insistence that he continue his studies, the youngest made the decision to only dedicate himself to work.
Where is it necessary for children and adolescents to have real opportunities for development, taking advantage of the vulnerability that girls and boys have?
The young man decided to go to the state of Mexico, where 3 of his paternal uncles were, to also work in the construction industry. However, being underage, he was not accepted and instead got a job as a gardener. He left for work for 15 days, returned home for another 15 days, then went back to work.
He was in constant communication with his parents to tell them that he was okay and not to worry.
In fact, he had just started working. The young man managed to send money home 3 times. Amounts of 600 pesos, while he used the rest of his salary to eat and pay rent. Abraham was found, by the way, with a gunshot to the head in the forehead. After this atrocity happened, his loved ones remember him as a healthy young man who loved video games. When he died, his games were buried with him in his coffin. So, wherever he is, he can continue playing his favorite video games. It's sad, as Abraham would have been 31 years old today.
I remember, and it makes me sad and helpless because we have to call these young people's illusions. Even though they might have gone of their own free will, they thought it was different.
Ultimately, what happened with these 24 Masons is a grim reminder above all of the human costs. In this battle or in that battle against drug trafficking, which, although it happened 17 years ago, is a topic that repeats itself daily. Sadly, the issue of labor deception remains relevant.
Here they slept in this place. Here they had them. Here they slept on the floor.
Thousands of Mexicans in search of better job offers are deceived by the drug cartels. Most of them have their lives taken in the worst way, and if they're lucky, they're finally joined to the ranks of organized crime. And luck is what they call it in quotes, stretching their lives a bit longer in the hands of evil.
Some went this way of their own free will.
Thus, there were people who wanted
to employ the main
person responsible for vulnerable people having security should be the Mexican state, which, well, overlooks this problem. Justice always ends up in the hands of the relatives of the disappeared and to the relatives from whom they take away life. We currently have indeed the case of the extermination camp in Jalisco, where thousands of workers were worn out as a result of deceptive offers from organized crime.
To come here, the truth was economically strong, and well, every search comes out of our pocket, unless the government supports us.
Today we are aware of this recruitment ranch only thanks to the activists who never stop in their searches, even though this also cost them, unfortunately, their economy and their life. As long as the state and authorities allow these crimes, many more will fall victim to these traps, unfortunately. Out of desperation for better opportunities and the desire to earn a little more than in their homeland. And here it is important not to stop talking about these atrocities like the one in Allende, the immigrants in Tamaulipas, and the Isaguirre Ranch, now the 24 murdered construction workers.
Regrettably, the list of cases continues endlessly, with many more stories yet to be told.
By the way, if you want me to tell you about any other story, you can leave it in the comments, by the way. To see more videos about the searching mothers, check out Pepe Misterio's channel with new uploads on Mondays and Wednesdays. You can find several of these ladies who are dedicated to searching for their children. And if you want to see more videos of drug traffickers, you can also see them on this channel. There was one last Friday and the Friday before that as well.